She grabbed the mic like she owned the room, smiled at the crowd, and publicly called me the placeholder. People laughed until they realized my expression had not shifted an inch. I had planned for this exact moment weeks ago, and the projector behind her was no longer playing the charity slideshow. One click, one sentence. Suddenly, the only thing anyone could hear was his ragged breathing, because he knew exactly what was about to appear on that screen. My name is Emery Price, and usually, I am the person who prevents scenes like this from happening. I stood near the back of the ballroom at the Golden Peak Winter Gala in Denver, watching the event unfold with the critical eye of a woman who had personally negotiated the venue contract. The air conditioning was set to exactly 68 degrees to account for the body heat of 300 guests in formal wear. The lighting was dimmed to 40% to flatter the donors. Everything was under control because I made it my business to keep it that way. I smoothed the fabric of my navy gown, which was elegant enough to blend in but structural enough to serve as armor. I was 34 years old, the operations lead for a hospitality group, and tonight I was supposed to be the supportive girlfriend, my boyfriend. Grant Halden was currently holding court near the center of the room. He looked every inch the golden boy of Denver finance, with his tailored tuxedo and that winning smile that made people want to hand him their life savings. He collected handshakes the way some men collected sports memorabilia, with a hunger that he disguised as charm. From where I stood, I watched him laugh at a joke from a wealthy board member. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture that signaled intimacy and confidence. For the last 2 years, I had been the woman standing quietly beside him, ensuring his tie was straight and his schedule was clear. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday and the one who booked his flights. To the people in this room, I was Grant Halden's steady, reliable partner. I was the logistics manager of his life, but logistics managers notice things. We notice when the numbers do not add up. We notice when the timeline has gaps. The mood in the room shifted slightly. The hum of conversation dipped as movement on the small stage at the front of the room caught the light. I did not need to check the run of show to know that this was not a scheduled segment. I had finalized the audiovisual schedule myself at 4 p.m. Sabrina Crow slid onto the stage. I had only met Sabrina twice before. She was vibrant, loud, and possessed the kind of chaotic energy that men like Grant often mistook for passion. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she gripped the microphone with a familiarity that suggested she thought everyone was waiting just for her. The room went quiet, expecting a donor announcement. Grant turned toward the stage, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he plastered it back on. He did not know she was going to do this, or perhaps he did, and he just did not think she would do it while I was standing 20 feet away. Sabrina tapped the microphone, the sound thumping through the speakers. She beamed at the crowd, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Grant, and then, briefly, dismissively, on me. She started her impromptu toast with a giggle that felt rehearsed. She told the crowd that she just had to say a few words about Grant, about how hard he worked, and how much he sacrificed for the community. It was charming at first. The guests smiled. It seemed like a tribute from a friend. Then the tone turned. She leaned into the mic and smirked. She looked directly at me and said that I was so patient for putting up with his late nights. She called me a saint. Then she laughed and said, Grant always needs someone steady at home to handle the boring stuff so he can be the star. A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the room. It was condescending, but it was wrapped in enough humor that people felt obliged to chuckle. I did not move. I did not frown. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of polite interest. Sabrina was not done. She was enjoying the spotlight too much. She tossed her hair back and delivered the line that she thought would cement her status as the alpha in the room. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper and said that some people do not even realize who they are dating. The implication hung in the air. She was calling me a placeholder. She was signaling to 300 of Denver's elite that I was the past and she was the present, and that I was too stupid to know the difference. The room chuckled again, but this time the sound was brittle. People were glancing at me, waiting for me to crumble. They expected tears. They expected me to run out of the side door so they could gossip about it over brunch the next morning. Grant looked at me, his eyes wide, silently begging me to keep the peace. He thought I would take it. He thought I would prioritize his reputation over my dignity, because that is what I had always done. He was wrong. I slowly set my champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray. I did not rush. My movements were fluid and deliberate. I walked toward the stage, the heels of my shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. I was not storming the castle. I was inspecting the property. Sabrina saw me coming, and her smile faltered. She gripped the mic tighter, unsure if she should hand it over or defend her territory. When I reached the top step, I did not lunge for her. I simply held out my hand, palm open, expectant. The authority in the gesture was absolute. It was the muscle memory of a woman who managed million-dollar events for a living. Sabrina handed me the microphone. I turned to face the crowd. The silence was heavy, thick with the anticipation of a catfight. Grant took a step forward, his hand raised as if to stop me, but he was too far away. I smiled. It was the warm, professional smile of a hostess who has just noticed a guest with an empty glass. I looked at Sabrina, then out at the sea of faces, and finally let my gaze rest on Grant. I brought the microphone to my lips and spoke in a voice that was soft, steady, and lethal. I thanked her for saying that on a microphone because my attorney loves a clear timeline. Confusion rippled across Sabrina's face. Grant froze. I held my phone in my left hand. I did not look at it. I knew exactly where the button was. I had set up the localized network myself. I had the override code for the projector system. I pressed the screen once. Behind me, the large projection screen flickered. The slide thanking the platinum sponsors vanished. In its place, a high-definition image appeared. It was a timeline. It was clean, professionally designed, and devastatingly clear. The header read, "Unauthorized transfers and duplicate relationships." The laughter died so fast that the silence felt like a physical blow. You could hear the ice clinking in a glass across the room. The timeline showed dates. It showed amounts. $5,000 for a boutique hotel stay on October 3rd, $2,000 for jewelry on November 10th, $1,200 for a spa weekend on December 5th. The recipient's name was redacted, but the dates aligned perfectly with the business trips Grant had told me he was taking. I did not have to say another word. The screen screamed the truth. Grant stood frozen near the center table, his face draining of color. He looked from me to the screen and back again, realizing that the steady, boring woman he kept at home had been keeping receipts the entire time. I looked at him, and for the first time all night, my smile reached my eyes. This was not a prank. This was an audit, and the results were now public record. To understand how I ended up standing on a stage destroying a man I loved with a projector screen, you have to understand how good Grant was at the beginning. He did not just date me, he campaigned for me. We met 2 years ago at a rooftop mixer for young professionals. I was there for work, scouting the location for a potential client, checking line-of-sight issues for photographers, and noting that the bar service was slow. Grant was there to be seen. He walked up to me while I was timing the bartenders and asked if I was analyzing the efficiency of the pour. When I admitted that I was, he laughed. It was a big, warm sound that made me feel like the most interesting person in the crowded room. He pursued me with a relentless, charming intensity. On our second date, he talked about how he wanted a partner, not just a girlfriend. On our third date, he mentioned that he could see himself marrying someone exactly like me. He made me feel chosen. That is the only word for it. In a modern dating world full of ghosting and ambiguity, Grant was solid. He was certain. He made me feel safe, like I had finally docked a boat in a harbor after years of rough water. I work as the operations lead for Westbridge Venue Collective. My entire career is built on noticing the things other people ignore. I am paid to notice if a contract clause is ambiguous. I am paid to notice if the hydrangeas in a centerpiece are wilting before the guests arrive. I am paid to anticipate disaster before it happens. Grant used to tell me he loved that about me. He called me his anchor. He said my attention to detail grounded him. But love has a way of creating blind spots, even for women who are paid to have 20/20 vision. The shift happened slowly. It was not a sudden change, but a gradual erosion of his patience. My questions about his schedule, which he once called attentive, started to be labeled as interrogations. If I asked why a dinner ran 2 hours late, he would sigh and tell me I was being rigid. He started using my greatest strength against me. He made me feel like my observation skills were a character flaw, something I needed to suppress if I wanted to be a chill girlfriend. Then came Sabrina. Grant introduced us at a casual drinks gathering about 6 months into our relationship. He clapped a hand on her back and introduced her as a friend from before. He had that grin on his face, the daring, lopsided smile that challenged you to make it weird. If I asked questions, I was the jealous girlfriend. If I accepted it, I was the cool partner. It was a trap, and he knew it. I watched them. It is what I do. I noticed that Sabrina never looked me in the eye, not once. She would look at my chin, or my shoulder, or over my head, but she refused to engage with me directly. With Grant, it was different. She touched him constantly. It was never overt enough to call out without looking crazy, but it was there, a hand on his forearm when she laughed, a gentle brush of her shoulder against his. It was the muscle memory of intimacy. It was a habit. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was overanalyzing, just like Grant said I did. Then the financial pressure started. Grant began talking about efficiency. He sat me down one evening with a spreadsheet. He knew I liked spreadsheets and laid out a plan for us to merge our lives completely. He wanted shared checking accounts, shared savings, shared travel points. He used words like team and future and building an empire together. He made it sound logical. Why pay 2 sets of banking fees? Why split checks like roommates when we were building a life? Something in my gut tightened. It was the same feeling I get when I look at a vendor contract and realize the liability insurance is insufficient. It was a quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of my mind. I loved him, and I trusted him, but I had worked too hard for my financial independence to hand it over entirely. I offered a compromise. I told him I would agree to a joint account for household expenses, rent, utilities, groceries, but my personal savings and my paycheck would stay in my own accounts. Grant was annoyed. He tried to hide it, but I saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. He asked if I had trust issues. He asked if I was planning to leave him. He turned the conversation into a referendum on my commitment. I held my ground, mostly out of habit. In my line of work, you never give a vendor full access to the bank account. You give them a deposit. I applied the same rule to my relationship, and that single decision is the only reason I am not destitute today. We opened the joint account. We put in our agreed amounts. Life continued. The final piece of the puzzle came from a source I never expected. Mara Linwood was a quiet analyst at Grant's firm. We had met a few times at company holiday parties. She was shy, the kind of woman who stood near the buffet table and avoided conversation. Grant often dismissed her as boring, but I always made a point to talk to her because I knew what it felt like to be the observer in the room. One afternoon, I ran into Mara at a coffee shop near their office. She looked nervous when she saw me. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the weather, and I turned to leave. She called my name, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned back. Mara looked around the shop, checking to see if anyone was listening. She stepped closer to me, her hands gripping her coffee cup so hard her knuckles were white. She looked me dead in the eye and said 4 words, "Just watch your statements." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the pedestrian traffic. I stood there on the sidewalk, the cold wind biting at my face. My first instinct was to call Grant. I wanted to ask him what Mara meant. I wanted to demand an explanation. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and the urge to scream was rising in my throat. But then the professional part of my brain took over. Panic makes you sloppy. Panic makes you ask questions before you know the answers. Panic gives the other person time to come up with a lie. I did not call Grant. I went back to my office at Westbridge. I sat at my desk, closed the door, and took a deep breath. I was done being the trusting girlfriend. I was done ignoring the red flags because I wanted to be chosen. I opened my laptop. I did not confront him, not yet. I decided to do what I do best. I decided to observe. I became the operations manager of my own heartbreak. I decided to wait and watch and let him show me exactly who he was. That night, the apartment was quiet in a way that felt heavy. Grant was asleep in the bedroom, the rhythmic sound of his breathing drifting down the hallway, while I sat at the kitchen island with the blue light of my laptop screen illuminating my face. I had opened our joint bank account, the one we established for household efficiency. At first glance, everything looked normal. The rent had cleared. The electric bill was paid. The grocery charges from the organic market were there, exactly as they should be. But operations management is about looking past the obvious data points to find the anomalies in the margins. I exported the transaction history into a spreadsheet, my fingers moving over the keys with the practiced speed of a woman who spent 40 hours a week reconciling vendor budgets. I sorted the columns by recipient. That is when I saw it. It was not a massive withdrawal that would trigger a fraud alert. It was a leak, a slow, steady drip of money leaving our account. $35 on a Tuesday, $50 on a Friday, $28 on a Thursday. The recipient was listed only as a payment app handle, a string of nonsense letters and numbers that masked the identity of the person on the other end. I highlighted the rows. The pattern was almost ritualistic. Every week, roughly $150 disappeared into this digital black hole. It was enough to notice if you were looking, but small enough to ignore if you were just skimming the balance. I closed the laptop and walked into the bedroom. I stood over the bed for a moment, watching Grant sleep. He looked so peaceful, his arm thrown over his head, completely unburdened by the secrets he was keeping. The next morning, while he was making coffee, I brought it up. I kept my voice light, casual, the tone of a partner just trying to balance the checkbook. I asked him what those transfers were, pointing out that they seemed to happen every week. Grant did not even look up from his phone. He poured almond milk into his mug and shrugged. He said they were just subscriptions. He told me it was for a fantasy football league data package and some tech newsletters. Then he chuckled, a sound that was meant to be disarming, and told me I worry too much. I watched him drink his coffee. I knew for a fact that the fantasy football season had ended 2 months ago. I did not press him. I nodded and took a sip of my own tea. But as soon as he left for work, I went back to the data. I did not log into the bank account this time. I logged into the budgeting app we shared, the one that synced all our cards so we could track our net worth. That is when the second crack appeared. At 2:13 in the morning, while I had been asleep, and Grant had supposedly been asleep beside me, I received a security alert in my email spam folder. I only found it because I was searching for the payment app confirmation. The subject line read, "New device login detected." I opened the email. The app had been accessed from an unknown tablet. I checked the geolocation data included in the security footer. It was not our apartment. It was not Grant's office. The IP address pinned the location to a block downtown, specifically near the intersection of 4th and Main. I knew that intersection. It was the location of the Avery, a boutique hotel known for its discretion and its overpriced room service. I sat there, staring at the map pin. Grant had been in bed with me at 2:13 in the morning. He had not left the apartment, which meant someone else had his login credentials. Someone else was checking our finances in the middle of the night from a hotel room. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to stop. I picked up my phone and dialed the customer service line for our bank. When the representative answered, I did not scream. I did not cry. I used my work voice, the one I used when a caterer tried to charge me for servers who never showed up. I gave them my security answers. I verified my social security number. Then I asked for a full, printed transaction history for the last 6 months to be mailed to my office address. Not our home. I specified that I wanted the detailed merchant codes, not just the summary descriptions. The representative asked if there was a problem with the account. I hesitated for only a second before answering. I told her no. I was just doing a personal audit for tax purposes. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. By the time the paperwork arrived at my desk 2 days later, I had already started the folder. It was a physical folder, navy blue, tucked inside my locked filing cabinet at work. I labeled it simply, Taxes 2026. Inside, I began to build a reconstruction of my life that looked very different from the one I thought I was living. I taped the receipts to clean sheets of white paper. I wrote notes in the margins in black ink. October 3rd. Grant said he was at a client dinner. Transaction shows a charge for 2 entrees at a French bistro across town at 8:45 in the evening. November 12th. Grant said he was visiting his parents. Transaction shows a gas station charge in a town 2 hours in the opposite direction. December 5th. The weekly transfer to the masked handle increased to $200. It was methodical. It was cold. It was the only thing keeping me sane. But the emotional blow came not from the numbers, but from a photograph. I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break, allowing myself 10 minutes of mindless distraction. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, suggested a friend for me. It was Sabrina Crow. We had no mutual friends on the platform besides Grant, but because I had viewed her profile once after the party where we met, the app decided we should be connected. I clicked on her profile. It was public. The most recent photo had been posted 3 days ago. It was a selfie of Sabrina standing in front of a snowy pine tree. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking radiant and happy. The caption was just a snowflake emoji and a heart. Around her neck was a scarf. It was not just any scarf. It was a cashmere blend in a very specific shade of charcoal gray with a subtle herringbone weave. I knew that weave. I knew the texture of that wool because I had spent 45 minutes in a high-end menswear shop running my hands over it, debating if $80 was too much to spend on a stocking stuffer. I had bought that scarf for Grant for Christmas. I had wrapped it in silver paper. I had watched him open it. He had smiled, kissed me, and told me it was perfect and that he would wear it every day. And now, here it was, wrapped around Sabrina Crow's neck. I zoomed in on the photo until the pixels blurred. There was no mistake. It was the same scarf. This was not just cheating. Cheating is a physical act, a betrayal of the body. This was something far more insidious. This was overlap. Grant was not just sleeping with her. He was taking the pieces of love I gave him, the gifts, the care, the money, and regifting them to her. He was building a relationship with her using the materials he had stolen from me. I printed the photo on the high-resolution office printer. The colors came out crisp and bright. I took a pair of scissors and trimmed the white borders. Then I opened my navy blue folder and placed the photo next to the bank statement from December 26th. The day I watched him open the box, I stared at the 2 pieces of paper. The evidence was undeniable. Overlap always leaves a paper trail, and Grant had been arrogant enough to think I would never look down. I closed the folder. I did not go home and burn his clothes. I did not throw the scarf in his face. I simply locked the cabinet, put the key in my purse, and went back to work. If he wanted to play games with our finances and my affections, he was about to learn that he was playing against a woman who read the fine print for a living. I did not walk into Danielle Klein's office to cry. I walked in to strategize. Danielle was a litigator who had a reputation in Denver for being able to dismantle a business partnership faster than a mechanic could strip a car engine. Her office was all glass and chrome, situated on the 42nd floor, looking down on the city like a chessboard. I sat across from her, not with a box of tissues, but with my navy blue folder. I laid the timeline out on her mahogany desk. It was no longer just a collection of receipts. It was a narrative. I had organized the data into columns: date of transaction, location of Grant's alleged whereabouts, actual location of transaction, and the associated cost. It looked less like a relationship grievance and more like a forensic audit of a failing subsidiary. Danielle put on her glasses and flipped through the pages. The silence in the room was absolute. She did not offer me tea or sympathy. She read every line, her face unmoving. When she finally looked up, her expression was clinical. She told me that most people come to her with suspicions, but I had come to her with a closed case. Then she gave me the advice that saved me from making a scene that would have cost me everything. She leaned forward and told me, very clearly, not to accuse him. She said that the moment I scream at him is the moment he starts hiding assets. She told me to act as if everything was perfect. She told me to be the loving, supportive partner for exactly 48 more hours. My job was not to fight. My job was to secure the perimeter. I left her office and went to work. I did not go to my actual job. I went to a coffee shop with secure Wi-Fi and began the process of digital extraction. I opened a new checking account at a completely different bank, one Grant had no relationship with. I contacted HR at Westbridge Venue Collective and filled out a new direct deposit form. The next paycheck, due in 3 days, would bypass our joint ecosystem entirely. It felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. Then came the passwords. I changed everything: email, social media, airline loyalty programs. I enabled two-factor authentication on every single account, linking it to a burner phone number I had set up through an app, just in case he tried to intercept the codes on my main device. It was paranoid. Perhaps. But after seeing a login from a hotel at 2 a.m, paranoia felt like prudence. It was during this digital housekeeping that I stumbled upon the weapon that would eventually end him. I was reviewing the contracts for the Golden Peak Winter Gala. The event happening that very night. I had been so focused on the personal betrayal that I had forgotten the professional logistics. Grant was the face of the event. He had brought in the big donors. The host committee was filled with his network. But when I pulled up the vendor list, I saw it. The audiovisual company, a high-end firm called Lumen Pro, was not contracted through the charity. They were contracted through Westbridge, my company, as part of a preferred vendor package I had negotiated 6 months ago. The contact person on the order was not Grant. It was me. I sat back in my chair, the realization washing over me like cold water. Grant thought he owned the room because he knew the people in it, but I owned the room because I controlled the systems that ran it. I had administrative access to the run-of-show software. I had the ability to override the projector feed from my phone. I called Danielle immediately. She did not laugh, but I could hear the smile in her voice. She drafted a clean civil strategy based on this new leverage. We would not just break up. We would demand repayment for unauthorized transfers totaling over $12,000. We would file for an emergency financial restraint if he tried to drain the joint account. She told me to prepare for reputation warfare. She instructed me to compile screenshots of messages, transaction logs, and a short written summary that read like a judge could skim it in 30 seconds. It had to be undeniable. It had to be factual. No adjectives, just nouns and verbs. As I was compiling the final dossier, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mara Linwood. The subject line was simply, "You need to see this." I opened it. It was a forwarded thread from Grant's work calendar. He had sent an invite to a senior partner for a strategy lunch next Tuesday, but he had made a mistake. He had added a note in the description field that was clearly meant for someone else. The note read, "I will bring my girl, Sabrina. She is dying to meet you." Below that was a frantic system notification. Grant Halden would like to recall this message. He had tried to delete it. He had realized his mistake seconds after hitting send. But corporate email servers are unforgiving. Mara had received the invite, and she had seen the recall attempt. She had screenshotted both. I stared at the words, "my girl." It was such a small, possessive phrase. He had never called me that in a professional setting. With me, he was always careful, always partner or better half, but with her, he was claiming ownership. He was integrating her into his career while I was still paying for his subscriptions. I realized then that this was not isolated. Grant was not just lying to me. He was lying to his boss. He was lying to the donors. He was lying to the world. He was juggling narratives like he juggled bank transfers, assuming he was smart enough to keep them all in the air. But gravity is undefeated. I looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. The gala started at 7. Grant was probably getting dressed right now. tying his bow tie, rehearsing his charming anecdotes in the mirror. He probably thought he was going to walk into that ballroom and shine. I made a decision right then. I could have packed my bags and left a note. I could have sued him quietly and moved on, but that would have allowed him to spin the story. He would have told everyone I was crazy, or jealous, or unstable. He would have kept his golden reputation while I faded into the background. No. He had performed his innocence on a stage. He had used public perception as a shield, so I was going to use it as a sword. I was not going to scream in private where only the walls could hear me. I was going to end it exactly where he felt safest, under the spotlight. In front of everyone, he tried to impress. I saved the final version of the unauthorized transfers timeline to my cloud drive. I synced it to my phone. I put on my navy gown, applied my lipstick with a steady hand, and walked out the door. I was ready to go to the party. I arrived at the venue at 5:30 in the afternoon, 90 minutes before the doors were scheduled to open, to the catering staff and the valet team. I was just the operations lead doing my final walkthrough. I walked the perimeter of the ballroom, checking the sightlines and ensuring the floral arrangements were not blocking the view of the stage. My pulse was steady, hovering around 70 beats per minute, which was remarkably calm for a woman about to drop a bombshell in the middle of a black tie gala. I made my way to the audiovisual booth at the back of the room. The tech lead, a young guy named Kevin, whom I had hired for 3 previous events, gave me a wave. I stepped inside the booth and asked to see the input board. It was a mess of cables and blinking lights, a language I spoke fluently. I traced the line for the main projector. Currently, it was set to cycle through a loop of sponsor logos and heartwarming charity photos. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I told Kevin I had a backup deck that needed to be on standby in case the main laptop froze. It was a standard precaution in our industry, so he did not blink. I plugged my phone into the secondary HDMI port and labeled it Input B on the control board. I tested the switch. With a single tap, the screen went black for a fraction of a second before mirroring my display. It was clean, silent, and effortless. I switched it back to the sponsor loop and thanked Kevin. He had no idea he had just armed the weapon. I walked back out onto the floor as the room began to fill. I needed to verify the audience. A public execution only works if the right jury is present. I scanned the arrivals near the champagne tower. Mara Linwood was there, wearing a sensible black dress, holding a glass of sparkling water. She caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She was the witness who knew the backstory. Then I saw 2 of Grant's senior colleagues, the managing partners who controlled his bonus structure and his future at the firm. They were laughing near the bar. And finally, I spotted the host's spouse, a formidable woman named Eleanor, who managed the donor trust and had 0 tolerance for ethical gray areas. The cast was assembled. Grant arrived at 6:45. He looked impeccable, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of failing upward. He walked straight to me, kissed my cheek, and asked if everything was running on schedule. I reached up and straightened his bow tie, smoothing the silk with my thumbs. I forced my face to soften, molding my expression into one of affectionate pride. I smiled at him, a warm, intimate smile that reached my eyes. It was the best acting performance of my life. I could not let him see the ice in my veins. If he sensed even a tremor of anger, he would pivot. He would manufacture a crisis to get us out of there. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to feel untouchable. Then the doors opened for general admission, and Sabrina Crow walked in. She was not wearing something subtle. She was wearing a floor-length red gown with a slit that ran up to her thigh, a dress that screamed intention rather than coincidence, in a sea of winter blues and blacks. She was a flare gun. She did not look for a drink. She did not look for the host. She scanned the room, locked onto Grant, and walked straight toward us. She slid into the space beside him, close enough that her arm brushed against his jacket. She did not say hello to me. She looked up at Grant with a wide, dazzling smile and told him he looked expensive. Grant laughed, that booming, performative laugh he saved for donors, and shifted his stance to open the circle to include her. I watched him manage the optics. It was a masterclass in plausible deniability. A wealthy donor couple approached us, and Grant stepped forward to greet them. He shook the husband's hand and kissed the wife on the cheek. Then he turned to introduce us. He gestured to Sabrina first. He introduced her by her full name and mentioned she worked in marketing, giving her a professional reason to be in his orbit. Then he turned to me. He paused. He said, "And you both know Emery." He did not say my partner. He did not say my girlfriend. He did not even say the woman I live with. He just used my name, stripping away my title and my status in a single breath. It was a tiny cruelty, a microaggression of omission that told the room exactly where I stood in his hierarchy. To the donors, I was just Emery, a fixture of the venue. While Sabrina was the exciting new variable, I noted it. I did not frown. I did not correct him. I filed it away in my mind under proof of pattern. It was the final validation I needed. He was not just cheating on me physically. He was erasing me socially while I was standing right next to him. The night moved on, the lights dimmed, and the host took the stage to thank the sponsors. I stood slightly behind Grant and Sabrina. They were standing so close their shoulders were touching. I could see Grant's hand hovering near the small of her back, not quite touching, but close enough to signal possession. The host, a charismatic man who loved audience participation, announced that before the main presentation, he wanted to open the floor for a few impromptu toasts. He asked if anyone wanted to share a story about the impact of the foundation or the people in the room. The air in the room shifted. Usually, there is a long, awkward pause during these moments as people stare at their shoes, but not tonight. Sabrina's hand shot up before anyone else could even take a breath. It was aggressive. It was hungry. I saw Grant stiffen. He turned to her, his eyes widening slightly, perhaps realizing that he had lost control of the asset. But he did not stop her. He could not stop her without making a scene. I had the headset in my clutch. I could have radioed the stage manager to cut the mic. I could have signaled the host to ignore her. I had the power to shut her down before she said a single word. I did nothing. I stood perfectly still. My hands clasped loosely in front of me. I wanted her to have the floor. I wanted her to feel comfortable enough to overplay her hand. I needed her to believe she had won so completely that she could spike the football in the end zone. The host pointed to her and smiled. A stagehand hurried over with a wireless microphone. Sabrina took it, stepped away from Grant, and walked toward the small riser at the front of the room. She looked back at us once, a smirk playing on her lips. Grant looked at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. I met his gaze and gave him a reassuring nod. The supportive partner until the bitter end. He exhaled, thinking he was safe. He had no idea that I had already switched the input channel. The stage was set, the players were in position, and I was done watching. Sabrina held the microphone with a loose, casual grip, leaning one hip against the podium as if she were about to perform a stand-up set rather than deliver a charity toast. The room was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt brittle, like thin glass waiting to shatter. I stood 10 feet away, my hands folded, watching her with the polite attentiveness of a woman who had already signed off on the demolition order. She started by giggling, a sound that echoed sharply through the high-end speakers I had calibrated earlier that afternoon. She looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with a mixture of pity and malice. She told the crowd that she just had to give a shout-out to Emery, who was so sweet for supporting Grant's incredibly busy life. She emphasized the word sweet in a way that made it sound like a synonym for pathetic. She said it must be hard being the one who stays home and handles the bills while Grant is out changing the world, but that someone has to be the stable one. The room chuckled, but it was a nervous, confused sound. The donors and colleagues glanced at each other, unsure if this was a roast or a genuine compliment. Sabrina was playing a dangerous game of humiliation disguised as humor, positioning me as the boring, domestic accessory while implying that she was the vibrant, exciting muse. Grant was smiling, but his jaw was tight. He looked at me, then at Sabrina, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to calculate the blast radius. He laughed along, because laughing was his default defense mechanism, but sweat was starting to bead on his forehead. Sabrina, emboldened by the scattered laughter and the lack of intervention, decided to escalate. She wanted to stake her claim. She wanted everyone in that room, from the managing partners to the waiters, to know that she was not just a friend. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to the back of the ballroom. She smirked and said that, "Honestly, Grant and I have been together way longer than she thinks." The air left the room. The nervous laughter died instantly. It was a confession. It was a boast, and it was the exact piece of verbal evidence I had been waiting for. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I simply moved. I stepped forward, my pace unhurried, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood stage floor. I walked up to Sabrina, who looked momentarily confused by my approach. I did not snatch the microphone from her. I held out my hand with a smile that was gracious, warm, and utterly terrifying. She handed it to me instinctively, perhaps expecting me to try to save face with a stuttering defense. I turned to the crowd. 300 faces stared back at me, their expressions frozen in a mix of horror and anticipation. I looked at Grant, who had taken a half step toward the stage, his hand raised in a futile stop gesture. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice was clear, steady, and amplified to fill every corner of the venue. I looked at Sabrina and said, "Perfect," because now she had confirmed she benefited from money that was not authorized. I did not wait for the words to sink in. I tapped the screen of my phone, which was concealed in my left hand. Behind me, the 20-foot projection screen shifted. The logo of the Children's Hospital vanished. In its place, the clean, stark white background of my timeline appeared. It was not a slide deck. It was a forensic accounting of betrayal. The header was bold, unauthorized shared asset transfers. Below it was a list, organized by date, category, and amount. The font was large enough for the people at the back tables to read without glasses. October 3rd, hotel charges, the Avery Boutique Hotel, $450. October 10th, gift purchase, luxury menswear, $85. November 5th, travel expenses, weekend spa package, $1,200. December 12th, dining, Le Jardin Bistro, $300. I had redacted the account numbers for legal privacy, but the shape of the betrayal was undeniable. The timeline visually overlapped with dates where Grant had claimed to be at conferences, late client dinners, or visiting sick relatives. The cumulative total at the bottom of the screen read $12,450 in bold red text. The silence in the room was absolute. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum. Grant made a sound, a choked sort of protest, and started to move toward me. He looked like he was about to speak, to spin, to charm his way out of the data. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I simply raised one finger. It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of total authority. It was the gesture of a teacher silencing a disruptive student, or a judge maintaining order in a court. Grant froze. He looked at the screen, then at the donors who were staring at him with open disgust, and he realized that any word he spoke now would only be recorded as a lie. I spoke into the silence. I told him that the donors in this room deserve transparency. I said that they trust him with their assets, just like I did. And then I added, simply, so do I. I looked at the timeline one last time, letting the image burn into the retinas of his boss, his colleagues, and his social circle. I let them see the gifts category next to the dates of his business trips. I let them connect the dots that Sabrina had so helpfully confirmed just moments ago. Then I tapped my phone again. The screen went black. I turned to Grant. He was pale, his mouth slightly open, stripped of his golden boy armor. He looked small. I delivered the final line, not with rage, but with the calm finality of closing a business deal that had gone bad. I told him to enjoy the party. I said I was done funding the lie. I placed the microphone gently on the podium. It made a soft thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. I turned and walked off the stage. I did not run. I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I kept my head high, my shoulders back, my expression serene. I could feel their eyes on me, hundreds of them, but I did not look left or right. I walked past Mara Linwood, who raised her glass to me in a silent toast. I walked past the host's wife, who looked at Grant with a fury that promised professional ruin. I pushed open the double doors at the back of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool quiet of the lobby. Behind me, the room remained frozen, the silence stretching out, heavy and suffocating, as Grant Halden stood alone on the stage, drowning in the truth I had finally let him pay for. My phone began to vibrate before I even reached the valet stand outside the ballroom. It buzzed against my thigh, a relentless, angry rhythm that did not stop for the entire 20-minute ride back to my new temporary apartment. I did not look at the screen. I did not silence it. I simply let it ring. By the time I walked through the door of the short-term rental I had booked 3 days prior, I had 30 missed calls from Grant. I let every single one of them go to voicemail. This was not avoidance. It was strategy. In my line of work, we record everything. Verbal conversations can be disputed, but a voicemail is a digital fingerprint. When liars panic, they talk too much. They leave rambling, incoherent messages where they try to rewrite history, and in doing so, they often admit to the very things they are trying to deny. Grant left 12 voicemails that night. I saved them all to 3 separate hard drives. Around 2 a.m, a different notification lit up my screen. It was a direct message from Sabrina. She had sobered up, or perhaps she had just realized that being the other woman is only fun until the bill arrives. The message was a wall of text, a frantic attempt to paint herself as a victim. She wrote that she had no idea I was paying for things. She claimed Grant told her he was separated. She apologized for the scene, calling it a misunderstanding, but then she slipped, in her haste to exonerate herself. She wrote that she never would have let him book the suite at the Avery if she knew it was coming out of a joint account. I stared at the screen. She had just confirmed the location and the nature of the expense in writing. She had tied herself to the October 3rd transaction on my timeline without me having to ask a single question. I took a screenshot. I did not reply. I did not owe her absolution, and I certainly was not going to give her the satisfaction of a response. I just added the file to the folder labeled Evidence. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, I sat in Danielle Klein's office. I looked tired, but my mind was clear. Danielle placed a document in front of me. It was a formal demand letter. It was beautiful in its aggression. It demanded immediate repayment of $12,450 for unauthorized use of joint funds. It also included a cease and desist clause regarding any further access to my personal property or financial credit. I signed it with a steady hand. Danielle informed me that we were filing an emergency dispute with the bank to freeze the joint account for non-essential withdrawals. We were flagging the account for potential fraud, citing the login from the unknown device as the primary trigger. This would lock Grant out of his primary cash flow. He could still deposit money, but he could not take it out without a tedious verification process that required my consent. I also formally revoked my direct deposit authorization, ensuring that my future paychecks would land safely in my new, private account. Grant, realizing that his phone calls were being ignored, tried the classic pivot. He sent an email to my work address, marking it as high priority. The subject line was simply, "Please read." I opened it. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He did not apologize for the theft. He did not apologize for the humiliation. Instead, he claimed that the entire presentation was a gross misunderstanding. He wrote that Sabrina was obsessed with him, that she had followed him to the party, and that he had only been trying to be polite to a mentally unstable woman. He tried to frame me as the one who had overreacted, suggesting that I had let my jealousy cloud my judgment. I did not argue. I did not write back a paragraph detailing his lies. I simply forwarded him a screenshot of a text message he had sent me 3 months ago. In the text, he had written, We are a team, babe. We build this life together. My money is your money. I sent it without comment. The implication was clear. He had created the expectation of shared finances. He had framed our relationship as a partnership. And now, I was using his own words to hang him. If we were a team, then he had embezzled from the company, my own company. Westbridge Venue Collective was the next hurdle. I walked into the office expecting a reprimand for the scene at the gala. I was prepared to be fired. I had used company equipment to air personal grievances. After all, instead, the CEO called me into his office and closed the door. He asked me one question. Did you use any company funds for his expenses? I placed a flash drive on his desk. It contained a full audit of every event I had ever managed. Proving that every dollar of Westbridge money was accounted for, I told him that my documentation was airtight. He nodded, slid the drive back to me, and told me to take the rest of the week off with pay. He said the company stood behind me. He told me that integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching, but it is also exposing the wrong thing when everyone is watching. I walked out of his office with my job secure. Later that afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. It was Eleanor, the host's wife. She did not sound angry. She sounded relieved. She told me she wanted to thank me personally. I was confused. I had ruined her party. I apologized for the disruption, but she cut me off. She told me that the donors had been getting nervous about Grant for months. There had been rumors of other quiet incidents, funds that were slow to transfer, promises that were made and forgotten, numbers that were slightly too optimistic. They had suspected he was sloppy, or perhaps dishonest, but they had no proof. She told me that my timeline had not just exposed a cheating boyfriend, it had exposed a liability by showing them how easily he lied to the person closest to him. I had shown them exactly how much risk they were taking by letting him handle their money. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my rental apartment. The adrenaline was finally fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I realized then that this was never just about a relationship. It was not just about a man who wanted to sleep with someone else. This was about a man who viewed people as resources to be mined. He had mined me for stability and administrative labor. He had mined Sabrina for ego and excitement. He had mined his clients for status and commissions. Grant had been playing a long game with everyone in his life. He thought he was the chess master, moving us around the board to suit his needs. But he forgot the most important rule of the game. Eventually, the pawns realized they outnumber the king. I thought the worst part was the lipstick on the collar or the secret hotel charges. I thought the betrayal was that he loved someone else. I was wrong. The betrayal was not romantic. It was financial, and it was systemic. 3 days after the gala, Danielle called me back to her office. Her tone was different this time. Before, she had been the confident litigator handling a messy breakup. Now, she sounded like a prosecutor building a RICO case. She did not ask me to sit down. She simply turned her monitor around so I could see the screen. She had run a comprehensive credit check, a deeper dive than the standard consumer report. She pointed to a line item near the bottom of the scroll. It was a credit inquiry from 4 months ago for a commercial business line of credit in the amount of $50,000. The entity listed as the borrower was Price Event Solutions. I stared at the screen. I did not own a company called Price Event Solutions. Danielle clicked on the file to open the digital application. My name was listed as the guarantor. My social security number was there. My previous address was there. Grant had filled it out. He had access to all of my personal data because we lived together, because I had trusted him with lease applications and insurance forms. He had taken the pieces of my identity and built a straw man to borrow money against. Then Danielle showed me the signature page. It was a digital signature, the kind you trace with a finger on a tablet or sign with a mouse. It looked like my signature. The loop of the E was large, just like I write it. The slant was correct, but the tail of the Y was too short. It was a hesitation. It was the mark of someone drawing a signature from memory, rather than writing it from muscle memory. Grant had applied for a business loan in my name. banking on the fact that I was an operations manager who focused on cash flow, not credit scores. He knew I had excellent credit. He knew I rarely checked the deep archives of my credit report because I paid everything on time. He had leveraged my financial health to fund a shadow corporation. The rage that hit me then was cold and absolute. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of calculation. Later that afternoon, Mara Linwood provided the context that made the numbers make sense. We met briefly in the lobby of a neutral office building. She looked terrified, but she handed me a printed Slack conversation from Grant's work archive. She told me that Grant had been bragging about it to a junior associate weeks ago. He had not confessed to the fraud explicitly, but he had explained his strategy for managing me. The message on the paper read, "Emery is great, but she is rigid. The good news is, she is too classy to ever make a scene. Even if she finds a discrepancy, she will handle it privately. That gives me a 6-month runway to clean things up later." I read the sentence twice. Too classy to ever make a scene. He had weaponized my dignity. He had counted on my good manners to protect his bad crimes. He believed that even if I caught him, I would be too embarrassed to expose him, too polite to go to the police. He thought my pride would be his shield. He thought I would quietly pay off the debt to avoid the scandal, allowing him to walk away clean. But he had miscalculated. He forgot that in my line of work. We do not just clean up messes, we identify the source of the spill, and we terminate the contract. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Danielle's forensic accountant looked into the Price Event Solutions ledger. The $50,000 had not been used for events. It had been drained in a series of payments to a single contractor. The payee was listed as S. Crow Consulting, Sabrina. She was not just the girlfriend, she was the payroll. Grant had set her up as a consultant for this fake company. He was funneling the money he borrowed in my name directly into her pocket. It gave him a cover story. If anyone asked, he was investing in a new business venture. If anyone asked Sabrina, she was receiving legitimate consulting fees. It was money laundering wrapped in a love affair. I did not go to Grant's apartment to scream at him. I did not slash his tires. I did exactly what a woman of my professional standing would do. I followed the protocol. I went to the police precinct with Danielle. We sat down with a detective from the fraud division. I filed a formal identity misuse report. I provided the timeline, the forged application, the affidavit stating that I had no knowledge of this business entity, and the proof that the funds were dispersed to a third party known to the applicant. I did not ask for vengeance. I asked for the law to be applied. The detective took the file. He told me that since the amount exceeded $10,000 and involved interstate digital wires, this was not a civil dispute. This was a felony investigation. The repercussions were immediate and catastrophic for Grant. Because the fraudulent line of credit had been applied for using a laptop that was technically property of his firm, and because the consulting scheme overlapped with compliance regulations regarding outside business interests. His employer was automatically notified of the police report. Financial firms do not like it when their vice presidents are investigated for fraud. They opened an internal review at 9 a.m. By noon, Grant's access to the building had been revoked. The compliance officer realized that if Grant was willing to forge his partner's signature for $50,000, there was no telling what he might have done with the client accounts he managed. Sabrina, watching her consulting income evaporate and realizing she was now part of a criminal investigation, panicked. She called me at 6 p.m. Her voice was high and tight, stripped of all the arrogance she had displayed on the stage. She told me she was scared. She told me Grant had promised her it was legal, that it was just a way to move money around for tax reasons. She said she did not want to go to jail. Then she offered me a deal. She said she would tell everything. She would testify that Grant set it up, that he coached her, that he signed the papers. If I promised not to ruin her, she asked me to leave her name out of the police report. She asked for a non-disclosure agreement. I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the scarf she wore. I thought about the way she had looked at me when she called me a placeholder. She wanted mercy now. She wanted me to use my power to shield her. just like Grant had expected me to use my class to shield him. I spoke into the phone, my voice flat and final. I told her that I do not make deals with accomplices. I told her that the police report was already filed and her name was already on the ledger as the beneficiary of stolen funds. She started to cry. A jagged, ugly sound. She begged me to help her. I gave her the only advice that mattered. I told her to tell the truth. I said that is the only deal available. If she lied to the investigators to protect him, she would go down with him. If she told the truth, she might survive, but I was not going to save her. I hung up the phone. I blocked her number. Grant had been right about one thing. I was too classy to make a scene in the street. I preferred to make my scenes in a court of law, where the evidence is admissible and the sentences are mandatory. The conference room at the mediation center was designed to be neutral, but under the hum of the fluorescent lights, it felt like an operating theater. The air was dry and smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on one side of the long oak table with Danielle Klein beside me. On the other side sat Grant, looking thinner than he had a week ago, flanked by a lawyer who wore a suit that was too shiny and an expression that was too aggressive. Grant's internal review at his firm had turned brutal faster than anyone expected. When a financial institution investigates an employee for fraud, they do not look for excuses. They look for liability. They had asked for documentation regarding his outside business interests, specifically the Price Event Solutions entity. Grant had scrambled, trying to produce invoices and contracts that did not exist. In contrast, the timeline I had provided to the police, and subsequently to his compliance officer, was cleaner than their own internal records. I had matched every withdrawal to a specific date, time, and location. I had done their work for them. Grant's lawyer, a man named Mr. Vane, tried to take control of the room immediately. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table, and announced that they were preparing to file a countersuit for defamation of character. He claimed that my stunt at the gala had caused irreparable harm to Grant's professional reputation, and that I had maliciously manipulated private data to create a false narrative. He used words like cyber harassment and unauthorized access. Danielle did not look up from her notes. She waited for him to finish his opening monologue. Then, she slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a text message thread provided by Sabrina Crow. Sabrina, terrified of the felony charges hanging over her head, had turned state's witness with alarming speed. She had provided the investigators with everything, including the coaching sessions Grant had given her before the party. I watched Grant read the transcript. The color drained from his face. In the messages, sent 2 days before the gala, Grant had written specific instructions to Sabrina. He told her exactly what to say to rattle me. He wrote that if she could humiliate me enough, if she could make me feel small and pathetic in front of the donors, I would retreat into my shell and stop asking questions about the bank account. He explicitly stated that the goal was to silence me through public embarrassment so he could buy more time to fix the numbers. Danielle spoke then, her voice calm and professional. She told Mr. Vane that defamation requires the statement to be false. She pointed out that the text messages proved that the humiliation was premeditated by his client, not mine. She added that since Grant had admitted to the plan in writing, any countersuit would open him up to further discovery, which would likely reveal more incriminating communications. Mr. Vane pulled the paper back and whispered something to Grant. Grant did not respond. He was staring at the table, realizing that the woman he had treated as a disposable accessory had kept the receipts that would bury him. But the assault on his narrative was not over. Mr. Vane tried a different angle. He argued that I had illegally hacked into the venue's audiovisual system to display the timeline, which constituted a breach of digital security statutes. He wanted to paint me as a cybercriminal to discredit my character. Danielle nodded to the mediator and asked to bring in our witness. The door opened, and Kevin, the lead technician from Lumen Pro, walked in. He looked uncomfortable in his work polo shirt, clutching a stack of system logs. He sat down and swore to tell the truth. Danielle asked him one question. Did Ms. Price hack the system? Kevin shook his head. He explained that as the contracted operations lead for the event, I had full administrative credentials. He testified that I did not bypass any firewalls or break any codes. He stated clearly that I simply switched the input to a secondary channel that I had legally connected and labeled myself. He called it a standard A/V switching protocol, not a hack. The accusation of cybercrime evaporated in seconds. I was not a hacker. I was a manager who knew how to use her own equipment. The mediation shifted then. We moved from posturing to arithmetic. Grant was forced to look at the numbers. We went line by line through the forensic accounting. $12,450 in unauthorized consumer spending, $50,000 in fraudulent business credit, $4,000 in consulting fees paid to Sabrina Crow. Grant tried to argue that the weekly transfers were just household management. Danielle pointed to the dates. She asked him to explain how a $200 transfer on a Tuesday morning contributed to the household when the recipient was a jewelry store in a different zip code. Grant stammered. He tried to say he bought gifts for me. I sat silently, knowing I had never received a piece of jewelry worth $200 in our entire relationship. The reality of the theft settled over the room. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a salary he had awarded himself at my expense. By the end of the session, Grant's professional life was in ruins. His employer had placed him on indefinite unpaid leave pending the conclusion of the investigation. They had quietly removed him from all client-facing work. The Golden Boy was now a liability, toxic to the touch. As we packed up our files, Grant tried one last desperate maneuver. He waited until the lawyers were speaking by the door and walked over to me. He looked wrecked. His eyes were red, and he carried a frantic, pleading energy that made my skin crawl. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He tried to hand it to me. He whispered that he was sorry. He said that the pressure of the job had gotten to him, that he made mistakes, but that he still loved me. He told me that we could fix this. He said he would pay everything back, that we could start over, just the two of us. He actually thought that a piece of jewelry could fix a felony. He thought that if he performed sadness well enough, I would revert to the supportive girlfriend who cleaned up his messes. I looked at the box. Then I looked at him. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. He was a stranger to me, a man whose entire personality was a collection of mirrored surfaces reflecting whatever he thought people wanted to see. I refused to take the box. I told him that I did not want his gifts. I told him that he was confusing consequences with romance. He was not sorry he hurt me. He was sorry he got caught. I walked over to Danielle. We presented our final terms to the mediator. We were not just asking for the money. We were demanding a full settlement that included immediate repayment of the stolen funds plus legal fees. But more importantly, we demanded a written, notarized acknowledgement that he had no further claim on any of my property, intellectual or physical. Mr. Vane argued that the acknowledgement was excessive. He said Grant just wanted closure. I looked the lawyer in the eye. I told him that I was not negotiating for closure. Closure is a myth. I was negotiating for protection. I wanted a legal moat around my life that Grant Halden could never cross again. Grant signed the papers. He had no choice. The alternative was a full trial where Sabrina's testimony and my timeline would become a matter of public record. He signed his name with a shaking hand, the ink sealing his defeat, under the hum of the fluorescent lights. I walked out of that building into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled of exhaust and city dust, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. I had walked into the fire, and I had walked out carrying everything that belonged to me. The paperwork that officially ended the war arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the gala. It came in a thick manila envelope, delivered by a courier who required a signature. I sat at my desk at Westbridge Venue Collective and opened it with a letter opener, slicing through the seal with a satisfying rip. Inside was the settlement agreement. Grant had signed the repayment terms. Every dollar of the $12,450 he had siphoned from our joint account was scheduled to be returned via a cashier's check within 30 days. More importantly, the fraudulent business line of credit, The $50,000 anchor he had tried to tie around my neck was formally canceled. The bank had accepted the identity misuse report and the police findings. My credit report was clean again. The debt was no longer mine. It was now a piece of evidence in the criminal case against him. Grant's departure from his firm happened 2 days later. It was not the explosive scene you see in movies. There was no security guard dragging him out while he kicked and screamed. Corporate justice is quieter than that, and much colder. He was simply separated from the firm. His bio vanished from the company website overnight. His email address bounced back with a generic system error. He was erased from the corporate ecosystem with a terrifying efficiency. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he was allowed to collect his personal items in a cardboard box under the supervision of a junior HR associate. The golden boy left the building through the service elevator. Sabrina's downfall was equally quiet, but far more personal. The investigation had stripped away the glamour of her position. When the forensic accountants laid out the payment schedule for S. Crow Consulting, the reality hit her. She realized she wasn't the love of his life. She wasn't the woman he was risking it all for. She was a vendor. She was a tool he used to move money, paid on a schedule just like the electric bill. Her queen moment collapsed into the humiliating realization that she was just another line item in his fraud scheme. She stopped posting on social media. She disappeared from the social circuit, retreating into the anonymity she used to despise. A week later, I received a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. It was from Eleanor and her husband, the hosts of the gala. I expected a polite dismissal, a request to distance themselves from the drama. Instead, it was an apology. They apologized for letting Sabrina have the microphone. They apologized for not stepping in sooner. They thanked me for saving them from a fiscal disaster by exposing Grant's character before they entrusted him with the foundation's endowment. I wrote back immediately. I did not play the victim. I did not ask for pity. I replied with grace, thanking them for their support and expressing my hope that their next event would be a success. I signed it with my full name and title. I was not the scorned woman. I was the professional who had handled a crisis. The final contact from Grant came on a rainy Thursday evening. I was packing the last box in the apartment we had shared, preparing to hand over the keys to the landlord. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text message from him. Just 3 words. You embarrassed me. I stared at the screen. Even now, after the police reports, the firing, and the debt, he still believed he was the victim. He still believed that his reputation was something I had stolen, rather than something he had forfeited. He thought my silence was his property, and by speaking up, I had broken a contract. I picked up the phone. I did not hesitate. I typed my reply. The final words I would ever say to him. No. I stopped protecting you. I hit send, and then I blocked the number. I did not wait for a read receipt. I did not care if he saw it. The message was not really for him. It was for me. It was the final period at the end of a long, run-on sentence. I moved into my new place the next morning. It is a loft in a converted warehouse district, with high ceilings and exposed brick. It is smaller than the old apartment, but it feels infinitely bigger because every square inch of it belongs to me. There are no shared keys. There are no shared passwords. There are no whispered conversations in the hallway. There are no stories told to friends that I have to pretend are true. The air in the new apartment is clean. It smells like fresh paint and possibility. My career at Westbridge Venue Collective took a turn I had not expected. Instead of shunning me for the public spectacle, the leadership team promoted me. They realized that a woman who can dismantle a fraudulent scheme while wearing a ball gown and managing a projector feed is exactly the kind of person you want running high-profile events. I was named the Director of Strategic Events. My first assignment was the Spring Gala for the City Art Museum. I walked into the planning meeting with a new authority, grounded in the knowledge that I can handle chaos without blinking, and in a twist that I never saw coming. Mara Linwood became a fixture in my life. We met for coffee 2 weeks after I moved. It was not a clandestine meeting to swap evidence anymore. We talked about books. We talked about travel. We talked about how hard it is to find good sushi in Denver. She told me she had resigned from Grant's former firm and found a job at a nonprofit where the ethics were clearer. She became a real friend, not just a witness. I realized that loyalty does exist, but it is not something you are owed just because you are dating someone. It is something you earn by telling the truth when it costs you something. Last night, I was working the floor at the Art Museum Gala. The lighting was perfect, a soft amber glow that made the sculptures look alive. The room was filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of crystal. I stood near the back of the room, near the AV booth, checking the levels on my tablet. A young man, a donor's son, had grabbed the microphone to make an unscheduled announcement. He was drunk, and he was loud, and he was looking for attention. The room tensed. People glanced around, nervous, waiting for the crash. I did not panic. I did not freeze. I signaled the sound engineer with a subtle hand gesture we had agreed upon earlier. He slowly faded the mic volume down, not enough to be abrupt, but enough to make the man realize he was losing the room. The host stepped in smoothly and redirected the attention. The moment passed. I watched it happen, and I smiled. I felt my feet on the ground, solid and steady. I touched the phone in my pocket, the device that had been my weapon and my shield. I looked out at the glittering crowd, at the beautiful facade of the social world, and I knew that I was no longer just a part of the scenery. I was the director of my own scene. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and old money, and I thought the words that had become my mantra. One move changed everything. I chose me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts on how I handled Grant and Sabrina. Would you have done the same thing with the projector? Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow across the world. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear about how we stand up for ourselves. Your support means everything to me.